How you doing today? This is Josh. We got 3 problems here today when it comes to simplifying radicals. I didn't want to do a lot of problems with this because I just wanted to mainly reinforce the rule or rules on how to do these, just so that it makes sense. And you know, there's like so many of these you can find online. So I figured let me just do a couple to show you some different things that can happen and then let you jump into it from there. But if you have questions, send me emails, get in touch, do something so that you aren't just struggling through your math problems. Let's start off with this top problem here, 3 over square root of 5. In the first video when I talk about this whole multiplying and simplifying square roots and stuff, really when it comes to simplifying, when they say that in a book, what they're trying to get you to do is to realize that the fact that you can't have a square root here on the bottom. You might say, why? Well, because it's not technically a number. I mean, this thing could go on like 400 units or something, and it's just not always the best number for you to work with. But if you have it on the top, you can then divide it by a whole number and use it or apply it in some other way. So really what they're wanting you to do is, in a better way of saying it, is just get rid of all your square roots on the bottom. Okay, but there's just a rule that we have to make sure we follow when it gets a little bit more technical like this, okay? So for this one here, in order to get that out from underneath, we've already talked about how we can apply this whole, well, if we have the square root of 5 times the square root of 5, then it's just gonna cancel out and become a 5. But the rules of math say what you do to one top part or what you do to the bottom, you gotta also do it to the top, okay? And there's a couple different ways you could do this problem. I always teach fractions or multiplying fractions is when you multiply this by both here, you know, it becomes a fraction like that, and the rules of math say you just multiply straight across. 3 times square root of 5 is gonna give you 3 square root 5. Square root of 5 times the square root of 5 is just going to give you a 5. And at that point, you're done. You can't really simplify. You know, sometimes you'll get a problem where you could simplify this and this. You know, if this was like 5 and 10, then you could get a 1/2. And so you could simplify this as well. But if the problem just says simplify, that's what they're looking for you to do. To get the square root sign out from under the bottom, and then move on and say if you can cancel anything like this guy and this guy, or maybe there's like another problem next to it and you gotta like cancel more stuff out. But just make sure that that's the rule that you're getting out of this lesson, okay? Multiplying the top and bottom by the square root sign to get rid of the square root on the bottom. These next 2 get a little tricky, so if you want to stick with me, that's cool. Let me just write it out here. We have 1 over c minus square root d. I don't mean to make that like a capital C or anything. I just kind of picked some letters here, okay? Well, we got to use a rule that we used when we were multiplying our square roots, and that was the lesson just before this one, or I think one that would kind of lead into this work. Okay, there's a word that we need to use. I wrote it right there, so if you just watched that video, hopefully you remember what it is. Starts with a C. All right, I'll just write it because I don't even know if you remember what it is. It's the conjugate. Okay, and the conjugate, it's just kind of like the opposite, you know, like I don't want to make this sound too technical. It's not the inverse, it's not the reciprocal. If this one is a minus, then the conjugate is a plus, right? Let's just keep this simple. And what does the conjugate of this guy look like? Well, c plus square root d. And the reason we do this is because a long time ago, people realized, hey, if we use the conjugate, it's not only going to get rid of square roots on the bottom, but it's also going to work well when we multiply it to the top, right? Because what you do to the bottom, you got to also do to the top. So let's write out that next level of like what this thing would look like. Okay, so 1 times that is just going to give me that. So we have c plus square root d over. Now I have 2 binomials, so I would just go through and FOIL this thing and see what we get. Let's see here. I'll just kind of write the letters small here. Usually don't do that, but that's okay. C times C is going to get us a C squared. C times positive square root of D, I'll make that a little bigger, is going to give us a plus C root D. Inside is going to give us a minus C root D. So hopefully you're seeing what's going to happen to those two guys. And then negative square root of D times positive square root of D. Well, negative times a positive is going to give me a negative. Square root of D times the square root of D is going to get me just a D. Right, I'm hoping you said that out loud to yourself because that shows that you're catching on to these rules, right? Algebra 1 is all about these little rules and you're gonna apply them to like Algebra 2 and then keep on going from there. These little rules are gonna be helpful and you're gonna need them. And so it's important that we practice them now. Okay, well we know that these two middle parts are just gonna disappear. And so my final answer here is gonna be C squared minus D. So if you wanted to rewrite it, I guess you could, let's see here. I'll just use some space right over here. We have C plus square root D over C squared minus D. Now I do have students that say, hey dude, can I cancel this and one of these, right? Because back when we were like working on these expressions with exponents, you know, we were taught we could cancel this with this and just make this be like a 1 or something or a nothing. And then this would just be 1C left because we had 2 of them. You can't. And the reason is why? Giving you a second to show your knowledge, right? The reason is because these are quantities, right? They're parts of something bigger. And so we can't just bust these things apart. I, as a teacher, will try to put parentheses around it sometimes just to remind you that like, there's a quantity in there. It's not just free-for-all stuff here, right? We can't just, if we have 1 plus 3 over 3, right? Can we just cancel the 3's and say, well, yeah, the answer is just 1 over something, 1 over nothing, right? No, you can't do that, right? You got to add these together because it's a quantity. There's something happening. It's some number plus another number. So you can't just decide, well, this is common with this, therefore I can just cancel. Okay, so your final answer would be C plus square root of D over C squared minus D. And if you wanted to put the parentheses, you can. I don't think a teacher would mark it wrong because it's not. You're just kind of showing that it's a quantity. But with or without parentheses, that would be your final answer. So let's move on to that last one here. If you wanted to pause the video, this would probably be a good time because now you've kind of seen where I'm headed. And I have a problem that's very similar to the one that we just did. So we have square root of 3 over square root of 3 minus 1. So multiply by the conjugate, right? You're going to multiply by the conjugate because we got to get the square root sign out from underneath. And you'll notice that when we did this problem, by using the conjugate, we did in fact, get rid of the square root sign on the bottom part of the fraction. And that's really all they're asking for you to do. So we multiply by the conjugate, which is going to be square root of 3 plus 1, square root of 3 plus 1. For this one, I'll just write it out a little bit bigger here. And let's see. Now, if it helps for you to see it like this and put parentheses around it, you can, right? Because we have this times a binomial, which means we do need to follow our rules and distribute as we go, okay? So square root of 3 times the square root of 3 is just 3. Yeah, I guess that's it. And then we have square root of 3 times 1 is just going to be plus, well, it's positive, so square root of 3. And then we got this guy down at the bottom. Now, again, this is where I get students that are like, hey, man, I could just take a shortcut because I know the outside inside is going to become a 0. So do I have to write it? Well, it's kind of debatable, okay? I personally, as you're learning this kind of stuff, I always say write it all out because it's great for you to be able to show your work to your teacher, present to them what it is you're learning, and really show that you have these skills. If you start taking shortcuts here, I don't know, just be careful, okay? I'm gonna write it all out because I've rarely had it where you're like so jammed on a test that you don't have time to write out the conjugate, FOIL this thing, and get the right answer and keep going, okay? If you're like that down to the wire, then yeah, maybe take some shortcuts. But if you're just working through a test and you have plenty of time, then I would personally write it all out. Let's see here, FOIL. So first is gonna get me a 3. Outside is gonna be a plus square root 3, minus square root 3, and then -1 plus +1 is a negative, right? And then it's a 1. And you might be noticing that that last one, anytime it's a negative, I do kind of make that negative sign a little bit bigger than most of the time. And it's mainly because I want you to remember, like, these are the little areas where students make mistakes because they're like, oh, 1 times 1 is 1. And they start, and then like, if this is a smaller part to a bigger problem, you add that 1 to something else and you just keep going and going and going. And you get to the end of this thing and you're like, I don't even know where I made my mistake. Okay, so if you can give yourself these little hints along the way, then I think it just kind of reinforces what needs to be done. Also, when it comes to multiplying positives and negatives, there's a lot of times, even in my classes, I'll do that, right? I'll circle them so that people realize, oh yeah, the negative sign goes with the number, right? Whatever is in front goes with that number. And so we have to remember that. And so if making these circles around the numbers before you multiply, if that helps, then I say do it, right? No one's looking at this work. I mean, they're gonna look at it, a teacher will look at it, see what you're doing, but it's not like they're gonna say, don't circle stuff, okay? Use what you can to get this stuff right. So these become a 0. 3 minus 1 is a 2. So I'm just gonna write that right there. And now you got to look at the problem. Can you go any farther? Can you go any further? Is there anything else you can do? Not really, right? This is a binomial on the top. It's a quantity. Can't just bust it apart. On the bottom, we have a 2. Can't do anything with it, so I guess we're done. Did we get rid of the square roots on the bottom? We did. And so again, when it comes to simplifying these expressions, that's what we're trying to do. And most of the time, we're using that conjugate. So thanks for watching. Hope this was helpful. Subscribe to my channel. Check out my other videos. Send me questions if you have them, okay? And I'll be around. Thank you so much. See you later.